Welcome to our journey through the rich and diverse history of Native Americans in the United States. Today, we'll explore their incredible stories, struggles, and contributions. Before the arrival of Europeans, Native Americans inhabited the vast landscapes of North America. They had diverse cultures, languages, and traditions, deeply connected to the land. As Europeans arrived, the lives of Native Americans changed dramatically. Explore the impact of colonization on their societies, including the introduction of new diseases and the struggle for land. One of the darkest chapters in Native American history is the Trail of Tears, where thousands were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands. This tragic event had a profound impact on their communities. Despite centuries of challenges, Native American communities have shown incredible resilience. Witness the revival of their cultures, languages, and traditions in the face of adversity. Native Americans have made significant contributions to various fields. Explore the achievements of leaders, artists, and activists who have played crucial roles in shaping the nation. Our journey through Native American history is a reminder of their resilience, strength, and enduring contributions. Let's continue to learn, appreciate, and honor the rich heritage of Native Americans. A map showing the approximate location of the ice-free corridor and Paleo-Indian settlements during the era of Clovis culture. It is not definitively known how or when the Native Americans first emerged from, or settled, in the Americas and present-day United States. The most popular theory is that people migrated from Eurasia across Beringia, a land bridge that connected Siberia to present-day Alaska, and then spread southward throughout the Americas over subsequent generations. The 2021 findings of fossilized human footprints in relict lake sediments near White Sands National Park in present-day New Mexico suggest a human presence there dating back to the last glacial maximum, LGM, between 18,000 and 26,000 years ago. This age is based on a well-constrained stratigraphic record and radiocarbon dating of seeds in the sediments. Pre-LGM migration across Beringia has also been proposed to explain purported pre-LGM ages of archaeological sites in the Americas such as Bluefish Caves in the Yukon Territory, and Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania. Genetic evidence has suggested at least 3 waves of migrants arrived from East Asia, with the first occurring at least 15,000 years ago. These migrations may have begun as early as 30,000 years ago and continued to about 10,000 years ago, when the land bridge became submerged by the rising sea level at the onset of the current interglacial period. In November 2018, scientists of the University of São Paulo and Harvard University released a study of Luzia woman, 11,500-year-old skeleton of a Paleo-Indian woman who was found in a cave in Brazil. While initially believed to be part of the wave of Asian migrants, DNA and other evidence has shown this to be improbable. Using DNA sequencing, the results showed that Luzia was entirely Amerindian, genetically. The pre-Columbian era incorporates all period subdivisions in the history and prehistory of the Americas before the appearance of significant European influences on the American continents, spanning the time of the original settlement in the Upper Paleolithic period to European colonization during the early modern period. While technically referring to the era before Christopher Columbus' 1492 arrival on the continent, in practice the term usually includes the history of indigenous cultures. Until they were conquered or significantly influenced by Europeans, even if this happened decades, or even centuries, after Columbus' initial landing, Native American cultures are not normally included in characterizations of advanced Stone Age cultures as Neolithic, which is a category that more often includes only the cultures in Eurasia, Africa, and other regions. The archaeological periods used are the classifications of archaeological periods and cultures established in Gordon Wiley and Philip Phillips' 1958 book Method and Theory in American Archaeology. They divided the archaeological record in the Americas into 5 phases. Native Americans, sometimes called American Indians, First Americans, or Indigenous Americans, are the indigenous peoples of the United States or portions thereof, such as American Indians from the contiguous United States and Alaska Natives. The United States Census Bureau defines Native American as all people indigenous to the United States and its territories, including Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders, whose data are published separately from American Indians and Alaska Natives. The U.S. Census tracks data from American Indians and Alaska Natives separately from Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders, who include Samoan Americans and Chamorros. The European colonization of the Americas that began in 1492 resulted in a precipitous decline in Native American population because of newly introduced diseases, including weaponized diseases and biological warfare by European colonizers, wars, ethnic cleansing, and enslavement. After its formation, the United States, as part of its policy of settler colonialism, continued to wage war and perpetrated massacres against many Native American peoples, removed them from their ancestral lands, and subjected them to one-sided treaties and to discriminatory government policies. These later focused on forced assimilation into the 20th century. When the United States was created, established Native American tribes were generally considered semi-independent nations, as they generally lived in communities separate from white settlers. The federal government signed treaties at a government-to-government level until the Indian Appropriations Act of 1871 ended recognition of independent Native nations, and started treating them as domestic dependent nations, subject to applicable federal laws. This law did preserve the rights and privileges agreed to under the treaties, including a large degree of tribal sovereignty. For this reason, many Native American reservations are still independent of state law, and the actions of tribal citizens on these reservations are subject only to tribal courts and federal law, often differently applicable to tribal lands than to U.S. state or territory by exemption, exclusion, treaty, or superseding tribal or federal law. The Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 granted U.S. citizenship to all Native Americans born in the United States who had not yet obtained it. This emptied the Indians not taxed category established by the United States. American tribes of the United States and makes many but not all of the guarantees of the U.S. Bill of Rights applicable within the tribes. That act appears today in Title 25, Sections 1301 to 1303 of the United States Code. Since the 1960s, Native American self-determination movements have resulted in positive changes to the lives of many Native Americans, though there are still many contemporary issues faced by them. Today, Constitution allowed natives to vote in state and federal elections, and extended the 14th Amendment protections granted to people subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. However, some states continued to deny Native Americans voting rights for several decades. Titles 2 through 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1968 comprise the Indian Civil Rights Act, which applies to the native of the United States and makes many but not all of the guarantees of the U.S. Bill of Rights applicable within the tribes. That act appears today in Title 25, Sections 1301 to 1303 of the United States Code. Since the 1960s, Native American self-determination movements have resulted in positive changes to the lives of many Native Americans, though there are still many contemporary issues faced by them. Today, beginning toward the end of the 15th century, the migration of Europeans to the Americas led to centuries of population, cultural, and agricultural transfer and adjustment between Old and New World societies, a process known as the Columbian Exchange. As most Native American groups had previously preserved their histories by means of oral traditions and artwork, the first written accounts of the contact were provided by Europeans. Ethnographers commonly classify the indigenous peoples of North America into 10 geographical regions with shared cultural traits, called cultural areas. Some scholars combine the Plateau and Great Basin regions into the Intermontane West, some separate prairie peoples from Great Plains peoples, while some separate Great Lakes tribes from the northeastern woodlands. The 10 cultural areas are Arctic, including Aleut, Inuit, and Yupik peoples; Subarctic, northeastern woodlands, southeastern woodlands, Great Plains, Great Basin, Northwest Plateau, Northwest Coast, California, Southwest, Oasis America. At the time of the first contact, the indigenous cultures were quite different from those of the proto-industrial and mostly Christian immigrants. Some northeastern and southwestern cultures, in particular, were matrilineal and operated on a more collective basis than that with which Europeans were familiar. The majority of indigenous American tribes treated their hunting grounds and agricultural lands as being for the use of their entire tribe. At that time, Europeans had cultures that had developed concepts of individual property rights with respect to land that were extremely different. The differences in cultures between the established Native Americans and immigrant Europeans, as well as the shifting alliances among different nations during periods of warfare, caused extensive political tension, ethnic violence, and social disruption. Native Americans suffered high fatality rates from contact with European diseases that were new to them, and to which they had not yet acquired immunity. The diseases were endemic to the Spanish and other Europeans, and were spread by direct contact, probably primarily contact with domesticated pigs that had been brought over by European expeditions and had then escaped. Smallpox epidemics are thought to have caused the greatest loss of life for indigenous populations. As William M. Denevan, a noted author and professor emeritus of geography at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the pristine myth The Landscape of the Americas in 1492, the decline of Native American populations was rapid and severe, probably the greatest demographic disaster ever. Old World diseases were the primary killer. In many regions, particularly the tropical lowlands population was rapid and severe, probably the greatest demographic disaster ever. Old World diseases were the primary killer. In many regions, particularly the tropical lowlands, populations fell by 90% or more in the first century after the contact. Estimates of the size of the pre-Columbian population of the area that today is the United States vary considerably. They range from William M. Denevan's estimate of 3.8 million, in his 1992 work, The Native Population of the Americas in 1492, to Henry F. Dobbins's 18 million in his 1983 work. Their number become thinned because Henry F. Dobbins is by far the highest single-point estimate among professional academic researchers. It has been criticized as politically motivated. Dobbins' most vehement critic is perhaps David Heneage, a bibliographer of African literature at the University of Wisconsin, whose Numbers from Nowhere, 1998, has been jocularly described as a landmark in the literature of demographic fulmination. Heneage writes of Dobbins' work, suspect in 1966, it is no less suspect nowadays. If anything, it is worse. After the 13 British colonies revolted against Great Britain and established the United States, President George Washington and Secretary of War Henry Knox conceived the idea of civilizing Native Americans in preparation for their assimilation as U.S. citizens. Assimilation, whether it was voluntary, as it was with the Choctaw, or forced, was consistently maintained as a matter of policy by a number of consecutive American administrations. During the 19th century, the ideology known as Manifest Destiny became integral to the American nationalist movement. Westward expansion of European American populations after the American Revolution resulted in increasing pressure on Native Americans and their lands, warfare, and rising tensions. In 1830, the U.S. Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, authorizing the federal government to relocate Native Americans from their homelands within established states to lands west of the Mississippi River, in order to accommodate continued European American expansion. This resulted in what amounted to the ethnic cleansing of many tribes and brutal forced marches that came to be known as the Trail of Tears. Contemporary Native Americans have a unique relationship with the United States because they may be members of nations, tribes, or bands that have sovereignty and treaty rights upon which federal Indian law and a federal Indian trust relationship are based. Cultural activism since the late 1960s has increased the participation of indigenous peoples in American politics. It has also led to expanded efforts to teach and robust cultural infrastructure. Native Americans have founded independent newspapers and online media outlets, including First Nations Experience, the first Native American television channel, established Native American studies programs, tribal schools, universities, museums, and language programs. Literature is at the growing forefront of American Indian studies in many genres, with the notable exception of fiction. Some traditional American Indians experience fictional narratives as insulting. When they conflict with traditional oral tribal narratives, the terms used to refer to Native Americans have at times been controversial. The ways Native Americans refer to themselves vary by region and generation, with many older, citation needed, Native Americans self-identifying as Indians or American Indians, while younger Native Americans often identify as Indigenous or Aboriginal. The term Native American has not traditionally included Native Hawaiians or certain Alaskan natives such as Aleut, Yupik, or Inuit peoples. By comparison, the Indigenous peoples of Canada are generally known as First Nations, Inuit and Métis, FNIM. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of Native American history. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content. Until next time, stay curious.